Welcome to Second Take, where we do not just report Africa, we tend to interrupt it. Tonight, South Africa is angry again. Migrants are the problem again, and politicians are concerned again, which in African political language usually means a meeting, a statement, and then a strategic disappearance. Somewhere in the middle of all that repetition sits the real issue, untouched, unbothered, and frankly thriving, like a government tender that nobody wants audited. We are unpacking Afrophobia not as an isolated incident, but as a system that has learned how to survive outrage. Then we step into another moment where Africa manages to argue with itself over English, a language we did not create, but now defend like inherited property. Same continent, same pressure, just different ways of expressing discomfort. We don't have that issue. This is Second Take. South Africa was never supposed to be ordinary. It was marketed emotionally and historically as the place where Africa proved it could overcome itself, the place where struggle matured into something functional, something aspirational, something that worked well enough for the rest of the continent to point at and say, this is what we are aiming for. And so, when migrants arrived from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Mozambique, Somalia, and beyond, they were not entering as strangers, but as participants in a story they had already invested in from afar. Except what they found was not a finished success story, but a country still negotiating the fine print of its own liberation. Because apartheid did not just segregate people, it designed inequality with the precision of an engineer who really did not want the building to collapse, but also did not want everyone inside it to have equal access to the rooms. And when democracy came, it removed the signs, but kept a lot of the structure intact, which meant millions of black South Africans entered freedom still structurally disadvantaged, still navigating unemployment, still living in spaces designed to exclude them economically. And into that already constrained environment came migrants, who were equally desperate but often more adaptable, more willing to survive within informal economies. And suddenly, what had been a vertical struggle between people and system became horizontal, a struggle between people and people. And that is where Afrophobia begins, not as ideology, but as pressure, as the quiet tension that builds when opportunity is limited and survival becomes competitive. Because when two people are struggling in the same space, the question is not who is historically right, but who eats today. And that question has no patience for theory. It demands immediate answers, and those answers often take the form of blame. And blame is efficient because it does not require structural analysis. It only requires a target, and migrants became that target. And so the violence we saw in 2008 was not a random explosion, but a predictable outcome of sustained pressure, an eruption that shocked the world but did not fundamentally change the conditions that produced it. And so the cycle continued, resurfacing in later years because nothing underneath had shifted significantly. And the satirical tragedy of all this is that the conflict is not between those who have and those who do not, but between those who do not have enough and those who have slightly less security. It is a fight over survival between groups who are both navigating the consequences of a system they did not design, and yet the system itself remains largely untouched, like a referee watching two players argue over a ball that the referee owns. And this is where the humor becomes uncomfortable. because it exposes the absurdity of this situation. People fighting each other over access, while the structure that limits that access remains intact and largely unchallenged. And so South Africa finds itself in a position where the dream it once represented is now arguing with itself, questioning itself, and in some cases turning against the very people who believed in it the most. Leadership in this context becomes an exercise in navigation rather than transformation, because addressing structural inequality requires long-term planning, political courage, and a willingness to confront systems that do not change quickly, while redirecting public frustration requires only narrative, tone, and timing. And this is where the ANC finds itself managing not just a country, but an expectation that it inherited from its own history, because it is still seen as the party of liberation, even as it governs a reality that feels far less liberating to many citizens. And so when unemployment remains high and service delivery struggles persist, the pressure builds, not just economically, but politically. And politics under pressure tends to look for relief, and migrants become one of those valves, not always explicitly, not always through direct statements, but through a gradual shift in discourse where they are framed as contributors to strain, as participants in competition, as part of the explanation for why things are not working as they should. And this framing does not need to be aggressive to be effective. It only needs to be consistent enough to become familiar. And once it becomes familiar, it becomes accepted. And once it becomes accepted, it becomes difficult to challenge. And that is where organized movements like Operation Dudula emerge, stepping into the space between public frustration and state hesitation, transforming sentiment into action through marches and enforcement that operates in a gray area between legality and community approval. And this week's Johannesburg march reflects that escalation, where citizens begin to perform authority, where enforcement becomes decentralized, and where the state finds itself in the awkward position of observing something it does not fully control, but also does not fully oppose. And the satire here is almost too easy, because you have a government that struggles to create jobs but manages to create narratives, struggles to fix infrastructure but manages to identify who is allegedly overusing it, struggles to regulate the informal economy but speaks about it with confidence. And the result is a political environment where the real issue remains complex and the unresolved issues become visible. And yet the irony is persistent, because removing migrants does not address the structural conditions driving frustration. It only removes a visible element while leaving the underlying system intact. And so the cycle does continue, with migrants absorbing the pressure that might otherwise be directed at governance failures. And politics continues to operate in that space where managing perception becomes as important as managing reality, if not more so. So now we talk about Malema and the uncomfortable truth. Because in the middle of this landscape stands Julius Malema, who has taken the rather inconvenient position of rejecting xenophobia outright and insisting that migrants are not the source of South Africa's problems, a stance that sounds simple but becomes complicated in a political environment that thrives on simplified narratives. Because what Malema is essentially doing is removing the easy target and replacing it with a more complex conversation about inequality, capitalism, and historical exclusion. And that is not always a popular move, because it requires people to redirect their frustration towards systems rather than individuals, towards structures rather than neighbors. And that is a harder conversation to sustain, because it is also a more accurate one. Because the presence of migrants does not create unemployment. It interacts with an already constrained system. And addressing that system requires more than enforcement. It requires transformation. And this is where Malema's Pan-African framing becomes significant, because it reintroduces the idea that African challenges are interconnected, that movement across borders is not an anomaly, but a reflection of uneven development across the continent, and that responding to it with exclusion only deepens division without solving the underlying issues. And yet, his approach is not without tension, because his broader rhetoric often relies on emotional intensity, which raises questions about whether you can mobilize anger while also trying to redirect anger. And that tension remains unresolved. But what is clear is that his position preserves an alternative narrative in a space where many actors prefer more convenient explanations. And that narrative insists that Africa cannot afford to fragment internally while still dealing with external pressures, and that addressing inequality requires confronting the systems that produce it rather than the people who navigate it.
Some of you who are beating up Zimbabweans here, some of you who are hating on Zimbabweans here, you are going to work for them. They will be owning their mines, they will be owning their retail, they will be owning their banks, they will be owning their land. You call them foreigners. What is the definition of a foreigner? A foreigner is a person who comes into your country without papers, doesn't have anything to show. That includes you. You are foreigners because you have nothing to show. You go around claiming this is your country. Let's go outside, show me papers that confirms you are the owner of this country. There's nothing, you don't own anything, yet you call people foreigners. You are a foreigner yourself, because you do not own. Foreigners means visitors. Visitors are people who just come empty-handed with a small bag. When the time permits, they go. That's you. You are renting. You are marching from the hostels, beating up people that they must leave South Africa. Yet you do not own a hostel. You are paying a rent in that hostel. You can be removed yourself from that hostel. You are telling people to leave your country. You come from an apartment. You come from a flat. You come from a house. You have no paper. When you return back home after taking out Zimbabweans, the white man will be at the door showing you the way out of the rented flat, out of the rented house, out of the rented apartment. You will not do that in society because you don't debate politics and you can't defend the position of the EFF when it comes to foreigners, because you don't understand. You have never given yourself time to discuss it amongst yourself. When we were putting the Zulu king, there were Zulus from Zambia, there were Zulus from Zimbabwe, there were Zulus from many other African countries who came to KZN to honor the coronation of the king. Now, all these xenophobic people didn't know that there are actually Zulus in Zambia who left here to Zambia. So, when you look at that in totality, you actually come to realize that we are actually one thing. We are one people.
Namibia is a land of movement, with waves that never stop reaching forward. Here, adventure is not something we search for. It is something we are born into. In every corner of this country, creativity rises from artists, from athletes, from dreamers. And when the world comes to explore Namibia, they discover something extraordinary. Because when sport moves people, creativity moves ideas, and tourism moves the world toward us. Something powerful happens. A platform where movement meets imagination, where industries connect, where opportunity grows, where Namibia's next chapter begins. Welcome to the Creative Sport Tourism Expo. Exhibit, partner, experience. Creative Sport Tourism.
At its core, this is not just a South African story, but a continental one, because migration within Africa follows patterns shaped by economic disparity and governance differences. And South Africa becomes a focal point not because it invites migration, but because it represents relative opportunity. And that creates pressure, which manifests as tension. And the continent finds itself negotiating a contradiction between the idea of unity and the reality of competition. Because unity is easier to articulate than to operationalize, easier to promote in speeches than to sustain in environments where survival is immediate and resources are limited. And the satire here is subtle but persistent because Africa has spent decades promoting integration while simultaneously struggling with its practical implications. And yet the solution is not to abandon the idea, but to engage it more seriously, to recognize that addressing migration requires addressing inequality across the continent, improving governance, creating opportunities that reduce the need for movement driven by necessity rather than choice, and redefining how Africans relate to each other beyond competition. And this requires both structural and cultural shifts, because policy alone cannot reshape perception, and perception plays a significant role in how these tensions unfold. And so the path forward involves confronting uncomfortable realities while also maintaining a broader vision of collective progress. And the question remains whether the continent is willing to engage that complexity or continue navigating cycles of tension and temporary resolution, adorned occasionally by violence. Now, away from migration, the continent found another point of tension through language, when William Ruto faced backlash after remarks suggesting Nigerian accented English was difficult to understand. Comments originally made while addressing Kenyans in Italy, which quickly circulated and triggered debate between Kenyans and Nigerians. Understandably so. This is what William Ruto said.
Kenyans, our education is good. Our English is good. Yes, we speak some of the best English in the world. Yeah, that is true. If you listen to a Nigerian speaking, you don't know what. You don't know. You need a translator. Even when they are speaking English, Ama. So we've some of the best human capital anywhere in the world, and we just need to sharpen it with more training.
The reaction was immediate because language carries identity and history, and Nigerian English in particular is widely recognized and culturally significant. And what may have been intended as a casual observation was received as commentary that implied comparison. Now, following the backlash, this is how William Ruto responded.
Please pass my regards, Minister, to President Tinubu, my friend, and to the great people of Nigeria who are my in-laws, and do so in good English. And, you know, I was captured, I was speaking to my fellow citizens somewhere, and somebody, it was supposed to be a private conversation, but somebody decided that it should be public. But they also misrepresented the facts. The facts are that I was talking about how we in Africa speak very good English, all of us. In fact, in some countries like Nigeria, if you don't speak excellent English like the one we speak in Kenya, you may need a translator, you know, for you to understand the excellent English of Nigeria. So that was the comparison, but somebody decided to take it out of context. But I think it is as well that we can have this conversation. And my in-laws, I hope there will be no consequences for whatever was done.
At a mining conference in Nairobi, attended by Nigeria's Minerals Minister Henry Dele Alake, Ruto clarified that his remarks had been taken out of context, stating that his intention was to highlight that Africans speak very good English and framing the comment as a comparison of proficiency across African countries. Alake responded humorously by affirming that Nigerians speak good English, which drew laughter and eased tension. William Ruto also referenced personal ties, noting that one of his daughters is married to a Nigerian, and extended greetings to the Nigerian President Bola Tinubu.
Explore the beauty of Namibia with our car rentals. From wide open spaces to the plains of Namibia's national parks. Enjoy the freedom of the open road. Go anywhere you want, whenever you want. We've got you covered, even in the most remote locations. Visit our website and see what we have to offer.
Welcome to Namibia, where adventure meets tranquility. With Enjoy, you have access to a wide range of accommodations to suit every traveler's taste and budget. Experience the finest dining and hospitality Namibia has to offer. Booking your dream accommodation is just a few clicks away with Enjoy. Join thousands of happy travelers who have trusted Enjoy for their Namibian getaway. Your gateway to unforgettable Namibian adventures. Visit us today at enjoy.my.na.
I'm sure you've heard the news, and Namibia is calling. And it's time to answer with a smile. From the rolling sand dunes of Sossusvlei to the wildlife wonders of Etosha National Park, Namibia is a treasure trove of natural beauty and adventure. With Enjoy, booking the most renowned lodges is as easy as a desert breeze. Picture yourself sipping coffee on a deck, watching the sunrise. Paint the sky in hues of gold and orange. Or how about a thrilling safari, capturing memories that'll last a lifetime? Our easy-to-use website hosts the most beautiful lodges Namibia has to offer. Whether you crave luxury or a cozy hideaway, we've got you covered. So pack your bags and let's turn your dream adventure into reality. Namibia awaits, and with Enjoy, your perfect stay is just a click away.
The exchange concluded on a lighter note, but revealed underlying sensitivities. And the satire lies in the contradiction because Africans are debating variations of a colonial language while still navigating its legacy. And the moment mirrors the broader theme on Second Take, where Africans define themselves in relation to each other through comparison, whether through migration or language. and the pattern remains consistent. The continent is still negotiating how to exist as a collective without turning those differences into division. We hope that the only time that you see any division from us is when we split these two fingers to say, that has been our second take.